So to further the conversation of attention and performance, we're going to talk about things and ideas of competition for attention. And then more importantly, we're going to talk about three components, and we're going to talk about Stroop effect, cocktail party phenomenon, and then this idea of intentional blindness or changed by blindness, and that's and there's going to be in each of these there should be a link where you can go back to the PowerPoint, and they will further your understanding of what each of these are if you look at those links. But talk about the Stroop effect first, right? So if you look at this, the term is house, and the color of the words are red. This is red and red, and this is blue and red. The first one meaning the color of the word, and then that. So Stroop effect is this, right? So the idea is if we put these up to you real quick and had you respond to what the word said, as opposed to the color of the word, which one of these do you think you would say the quickest? And that would probably be red and red, right? And that's because the color of the word and what the word says are congruent. They are matching. Blue and with red print is incongruent. That means the word does not match what the color of the word is. And then we have this idea of house, and house is neither congruent or incongruent. It's neutral, right? So it doesn't have an effect because the word and the color are not associated. House is not associated with the color. And so this idea of congruency is supposed to support parallel processing, where the blue and the red do not support parallel processing, right? So the incongruence slows our ability, our reaction time to respond to the color. So the Stroop effect is the idea that a congruent word and color of the word is supporting parallel processing, so it speeds up your reaction time to the task. So looking at this horse race of different color and Stroop interference with Dunbar and Cloud, this identifies two different case studies. So they had two parts for this first study. And here it was congruency and incongruency and control. And so the idea is the word and name and ink were normally written or from left to right. And then there's also one where they were backwards written, right? And so there's a congruence and an incongruence with the word and with the direction. So right, remember, so the blue and blue versus red and blue, and whether or not the word was written backwards. And so if you look at this study here, the squares are the name and the ink. So you are to say the ink color, and the circles are you're supposed to read the word. And you can see that the incongruence had a greater effect when you were supposed to read the name of the ink as opposed to the congruency. And they both had the same effect on the incongruence, both the norm and the backwards. So regardless of whether or not the word was written normally or backwards, they really had the same deteriorating effect on the response time, which is the response time is seen here in milliseconds on the y-axis. And the control group was the one that they had no relationship between. And then here, upside down and backwards was the words. And then same with here. And again, you had the same kind of concept. Read the name of the word or read the name of the ink. The important part here is what you can see from both studies is it had a greater effect on the ink if you had to read the ink versus reading the word. And that's because of the interference that is created by the color or the name or the words, right? We're so used to reading the words that a lot of times if we have to read the ink, the word is incorporated in that. And again, here's just another study that compares them all as well. They went ahead further and did the same thing, and you can kind of see the same response going forward. So the idea with this, from the Stroop effect and from Dunbar's word, is the word has a greater effect or is it more interference in our capacity to do it as opposed to the ink. And that's typically because we're used to reading the words as opposed to the ink. So this cocktail party phenomenon or problem is the idea that we cannot ignore incidental sounds. And that's this dichotic listening paradigm But there's this idea that we can listen parallel and require additional information processing and to ignore. So the idea with the cocktail party phenomenon is the ability to ignore those conversations around you to focus on the conversation at hand. And are we able to parallel process all this information that's going on around us and our conversation and really be focused on the attention of the conversation. And this focuses and this supports that idea of our ability to selectively listen and our attention. And here, now we're going to go on to this idea of blindness. And I really encourage you to go in and focus on and go into this study because these are links that you can access from the PowerPoint. But this blindness study is a series of studies where that really goes to show that sometimes we aren't the best at observing all the details of things around us. We often just observe the things that are most important to the task. So when police often respond and talk to witnesses, sometimes witnesses aren't the best, and sometimes we don't really see what we think we see. And by looking at this cocktail party, the blindness effect, and you really can kind of see it. So please go in and look at these passes so you can see what's happening. But this is that attentional blindness and then change blindness. And so focus of attention, this is really going to be a major kind of idea going forward. But attentional focus is really broken up into internal and external. And what we're going to do is we'll bring this back into the module 3 of the class and how we use attentional focus for performing. But the difference between the two is internal focus is where you're focusing on the body. So you look on a body part or the movement of some sort of body during the process. And external has you're focusing on an object in the environment or the outcome of motion. And I'll use a golf swing, for example. If I'm trying to learn how to golf, so an internal focus would be focusing on the arms or focusing on the hands, where a external focus would be focusing on the club head or focus on the ball or focus on the shaft, and those are all external focuses. Now, it's been shown that external focus is overall in general the better of the two. There are some benefits to internal, and that's mostly during the initial learning stages where you're trying to gain the idea of how to feel the body. But then there is definitely there's a greater transition to external focus being beneficial right after that initial learning of the skill, and especially during the expert. And we'll talk a lot about that going forward. But here you have just a little bit of a study in the focus attention and the variable error. Right, so the idea with the variable error is you want a lower score. And high skill, they had a greater change, and you can see they go the other direction with the low skill and high skill. And this is one of those studies that supports the idea that low skill can do better with internal. And so you can see the direction. And so we call this an interaction where they go the opposite direction in response, internal and external. So in this study, the external focus was beneficial for a high-skilled group, but detrimental for a low-skilled group. And so skilled experts focus on the movement itself as detrimental. And what I mean by focus on the movement itself is focusing on the body, not necessarily if I'm moving a bat or a club or something. But there's a disagreement on how this mechanism changes with skill acquisition. And really, one of the ideas I want to pull forward is this idea of choking, right? And choking is basically succumbing to pressure and the inability to perform underneath heightened result or heightened, let's say, skill or heightened award or heightened demand is another way to put it. And this idea that one line of thought process is that individuals who choke tend to go more internal in their focus and they worry about the body or something else on there. And so, it's like if you're a three-point shooter and you're really good at three-point shooting, you get to a three-point competition, and say you're at the University of Idaho where typically you don't have play in front of large crowds, but you go to March Madness, and because you're invited to three-point competition, and now you're in this arena that has 10,000 people in it. And then the camera's put in your face, and maybe at that point you tend to withdraw and really focus on the arm motion as opposed to the spin of the ball coming off your hand. And some of this has been shown, and there's been in one study there was a 25% drop of video okay performance when individuals focused internally on their hand and positioning as opposed to the outcome on the screen. Ironic effect is that idea that there's a thought about a negative outcome or the production of a negative outcome. And that's another idea of internal focus as with the body. So we look at some of the things of attention that will really identify performance. And we think about concepts like anxiety, motivation, stress, and arousal. And a lot of times, motivation and arousal we think of as positive things, but we think of anxiety and stress as negative things. But in this situation, what we're going to talk about is this inverted U, where on the y-axis, and this is a very important concept, right? So on the y-axis, you have performance. You have poor on the very bottom and good on top. And then the arousal level, and think of arousal level, you can put stress level, motivation, anxiety all down here. They all fall into this arousal level of where you're at, because they all are components of this heightened state of physiological and psychological tension and what we're really focused on and ready to go, right? And so you either have a low state or a high state, and those are the two extremes. And you see at both of those extremes, you come into poor performance. But in all these, there tends to be a moderate level where we're going to be our best, right? And so sometimes you'll say, this person's really sluggish, or this person's just off today and they're not really in the mood. And in those situations, we expect them to not do too as good. Or sometimes, that person looks really stressed or very really anxious, or maybe they just want to really, really win and be the best, and that motivation is too much, and so they got to go high or too low. So what this idea is that there's this window of optimal arousal states within motivation, stress, and anxiety, and how all these interplay that set us up for our best performance. And this is related to the Yerkes-Dodson law and its relationship between arousal and performance, and it's thought to be an inverted U. So remember this concept here, and really understand that there's an inverted U and there's a happy place. So anxiety and stress aren't always bad when it comes to performance. And this is just a study from Weinberg and Reagan showing that mean throwing score is most optimal at the moderate. And this also shows that the high level is greater than the low level, so there is an optimal. But remember, there is a threshold on performance for stress and arousal states and motivation. And this perceptual narrowing is an idea. So with increased arousal, you go into this narrowing of attentional focus and the eventual elimination of any peripheral output from probable events. So this distractibility concept is shifting the attention to a number of stimuli input, and it allows irrelevant information to enter the system.